Hi guys, and welcome to Boring History for a Relaxing Channel. Tonight we slip barefoot into a medieval winter so sharp it feels like the air itself has teeth. You're standing outside a small peasant cottage while the sky presses down, pale and heavy, and the ground crunches under you like stale bread. Your nose stings, your eyelashes want to glue themselves together. Even your thoughts seem to move slower, like they're wading through cold syrup. And here's the cheerful reality check. You probably won't survive this if you show up with modern expectations, like indoors equals warm, or my blanket will handle it. It will not. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, drop a comment with where you're listening from and your local time, because I love picturing you all scattered across the world while we time travel together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You push open the low door and duck inside, because medieval architecture does not care about your spine. The room is one room, a single space doing the job of kitchen, workshop, dining hall, storage closet, and bedtime. The first thing that hits you is the smell. Damp wood, smoke that never fully leaves, old straw, and the faint sour edge of people who work hard and bathe when the weather stops trying to murder them. The second thing is the temperature. It is warmer than outside, sure, but that is like saying a puddle is drier than a lake. Your breath still fogs. Light is stingy in here. A small fire glows in the hearth, more orange than bright, and it throws shadows that wobble over the walls. The walls are not solid stone like a castle. They are wattle and daub in many places, a woven lattice smeared with mud, dung, straw, and whatever else makes it stick. It is functional, not glamorous. The roof is thatch, thick enough to slow the wind a little, but not thick enough to make you forget the season. The wind finds seams anyway. It always does. It slips through cracks with the patient confidence of something that knows you can't catch it. You stand still for a moment and listen. A pot mutters near the coals. Someone shifts in the dimness. A child coughs and then goes quiet again, like even the cough knows it should not waste energy. Outside, you can hear the low complaint of a winter in the trees, that long whisper that never becomes a word. This is the part where your modern brain tries to do math. How cold is it, actually? There is no thermometer. There is only sensation. Your fingers ache when you flex them. The tip of your nose feels like it belongs to somebody else. Your ears are already bargaining with your skull for better living conditions. You realize how much your life depends on invisible infrastructure. Insulation, central heating, sealed windows, and the quiet miracle of a radiator that does not also fill your room with smoke. Here, warmth has to be made, guarded, and rationed like food. A peasant household is not trying to be cozy. It is trying to not die. That changes the vibe. You look at the hearth. The fire is not roaring because fuel is precious. Wood takes labour to gather and time to dry, and in many regions, access to woodland is controlled by local lords and customary rights. A mainstream historical fact that hits hard in winter is that peasants often relied on common rights to collect deadwood or gathered fuel in specific ways, and those rights could be limited, policed, or fought over. You do not just stroll out and grab a tree like it is a free sample. Winter is a season of rules. The floor is hard earth, stamped down by feet and time. Sometimes there's a scatter of rushes or straw to soak up mud and spills. Sometimes it is just bare and cold, like the ground is quietly trying to reclaim you. Your boots, if you have them, are suddenly the most valuable objects you own. If you do not have them, your feet learn a new emotion, despair. Near one wall there is a low sleeping area. Not a bed in the modern sense, but a mound of straw or dried grasses. It is lumpy, uneven, and slightly damp at the edges where the room breathes in moisture. The straw smells sweet and stale at once. You kneel and press your hand into it. It gives, then springs back with a rustle like dry whispers. You can already feel the itch that will arrive later, the kind that starts as a question and becomes a lawsuit. The household's clothing is not separated into day outfits and sleepwear the way your brain wants to label things. You sleep in what you have. Linen may be closest to the skin, but linen is not warm by itself. Wool is the real champion. Wool holds heat even when it is damp, and it resists the cold in a way that feels almost magical. If you ever want to respect medieval technology, respect wool. You touch a rough woolen cloth and it scratches your fingertips, like it is reminding you that comfort is a privilege, not a guarantee. A woman stirs the pot and glances at you like she's deciding whether you are real or just another winter hallucination. You imagine her hands, red and cracked, warmed briefly by the fire and then chilled again as soon as she steps away. Hands do everything here. Knead, carry, patch, scrape, haul, spin, mend, lift. Winter does not pause the work, it just makes the work hurt more. The smoke above the hearth lingers. In some cottages, there is no chimney as you would think of it. Smoke escapes through a hole in the roof, through the thatch, through gaps in the structure, and through the door whenever it opens. It means the air inside is a compromise between breathing and warmth. And nobody is fully winning. Your eyes sting a little, your throat feels dry. You understand, suddenly, why lungs in old age might sound like a door hinge. Now, here is a quirky tidbit that makes you blink. In some places, people believed certain plants or objects could help guard the household through winter nights. Not just spiritually but practically. A sprig of evergreen, a bundle of herbs near the hearth, a charm tucked into the thatch. It is not magic in the Hollywood sense. It is a mix of tradition, faith, and the human need to feel like you have some control while winter tries to rewrite the rules of your body. Also, if the herbs happen to smell nice, that is a bonus, because the cottage aroma is doing a lot today. You move closer to the hearth and feel the gradient of heat. Right here, in this narrow zone, the air is almost pleasant. 2 steps back and it drops again. It is like the room is divided into climates. You picture people arranging themselves by necessity, the smallest near the warmth, the older near the wall where the draft is less brutal. The adults rotating in and out of the heat like they are taking turns charging a battery. It is not romantic, it is logistics. And historians still argue whether the average peasant household experienced winters mainly as a slow grind of discomfort or as repeated crises that pushed families to the edge. Because the evidence is patchy and shaped by who bothered to write things down, you have manorial records, church notes, legal disputes, and occasional chroniclers who loved drama. You also have the quiet truth that most suffering is not recorded. It is just lived. You take stock of what you hear. No clock, no humming refrigerator, no distant traffic. Just the soft crackle of coals, a murmur of voices, the scrape of a wooden bowl, the occasional pop of sap in the fire. Winter makes sound travel differently. It feels close, intimate. Like the cottage is a small boat on a black sea and you can hear every creak of its boards. Your body starts to adapt in that stubborn way it has. You tuck your hands into your sleeves, you hunch your shoulders, you learn to keep your mouth closed so your teeth do not feel like they are made of ice. You also learn something else. Sleeping in this cold is not about achieving perfect comfort. It is about setting the stage so your body can do its own work. Conserving heat, slowing down, tucking life into the centre of you. You glance again at the straw bed and imagine lowering yourself into it. You imagine the first shock of cold straw against your calves, the way your muscles tense, the way you exhale and decide you will not complain out loud because complaining does not add heat. You imagine the small triumph of finding a pocket of warmth where someone else's body pressed the straw earlier, like a leftover ember in plant form, and, because your brain cannot resist, you think, wow, so this is basically camping. Except your tent is a mud and stick box, your sleeping bag is optimism, and the wildlife is mostly inside the house with you. That is joke number 1, and it lands quietly, because you do not want to waste breath laughing. You shift your weight and your knee pops, and you realise the cottage has another opinion. It would like you to stop making modern noises. That is joke number 2, delivered by your joints. And honestly, they did not have to be so rude. You look at the hearth again, at the small stubborn fire, and you get the sense that the whole household's night depends on what happens there. Not just cooking, not just light, but the last warmth that will cling to clothing and hair before darkness settles fully. The coldest part of the night is not a dramatic moment, it is a long patientium. Patient stretch. And you, standing here, are about to learn how medieval people face it without a thermostat, without electric light, without the comforting lie that warmth is automatic. You draw in a slow breath that tastes like smoke and winter, and you prepare to lie down in a room where cold is not a visitor. Cold is a resident who pays no rent and still acts entitled. That is joke number 3, and it is painfully accurate. The fire has shrunk to a sleepy glow, and the room begins its nightly transformation from barely tolerable to actively persuasive in its argument for hibernation. You're not alone in that shift. Bodies start migrating, slow and deliberate, like every person is a little planet pulled toward the warmest gravity. This is the first shock of peasant winter sleeping. You do not sleep as an isolated unit. You sleep as a household system. The cottage does not have spare rooms, guest wings, or that luxury concept called personal space. It has one main room, and when night truly arrives, that room gets used like a bundle that must be tied tight to keep heat from spilling out. A father finishes a last task, maybe checking a latch or moving a tool closer to the wall so it will not get stepped on in the dark. A mother gathers a child and smooths hair that smells faintly of smoke. Someone mutters a short prayer that is more habit than performance, because winter nights make people cautious even when they do not admit it. Then, without ceremony, everyone begins arranging themselves for the main event, conserving warmth. You watch how they do it, and it feels half like choreography and half like survival math. The youngest are placed in the centre of the sleeping heap, where the shared heat is strongest. The oldest are positioned where they can be tended without much movement. Adults take the edges, partly because they can tolerate the cold better, partly because someone has to be the human windbreak. It is tender and practical at the same time, like love translated into thermal engineering. Here is a mainstream historical fact that is easy to forget. Many medieval peasant houses really were single-room dwellings, especially for the poorer majority, and even when there were extra spaces, they were often for storage rather than separate heated bedrooms. That is why everyone in one space is not a quirky choice. It is the default. You ease down toward the straw bedding and realise there is no clean boundary where one person's sleeping spot ends and another begins. The straw mound spreads like a rough island, and the blankets are laid over it more like a shared roof than separate covers. You can feel the room's dampness pressing in from the walls, trying to reclaim every pocket of warmth you create. So the household pushes back by compressing together, reducing exposed surface area, and turning the group into one clustered heat source. It is effective. It is also intensely awkward by modern standards. You try to imagine explaining to a modern friend that your winter coping strategy involves sleeping shoulder to shoulder with your entire family, possibly with a cousin or two who is staying over because their roof is leaking, and nobody thinks it is weird. The friend would blink, call it a nightmare, and then ask if you at least get a nice pillow. You would laugh and then cry quietly into your straw. That is joke number 1. And you keep it inside your head because the household is trying to sleep, not attend your comedy special. As you settle in, you learn the next rule. Clothing stays on. Not all of it necessarily, but enough to hold warmth, a cap, a hood, a coif, anything that reduces heat loss from your head and neck. Your feet stay covered if you can manage it, because cold feet are not just unpleasant, they can keep you awake in a way that feels like your bones are buzzing. The blanket goes over everyone, and then smaller wraps or cloaks get tucked around gaps like a mason sealing a drafty wall. This creates its own little microclimate. It is not a toasty dreamland, it is a fragile bubble. The air under the shared covers grows warmer and slightly stale. Heavy with breath, condensation forms where warm air meets cold cloth. You can feel it as a faint coolness on your cheek, like the night is sweating. You notice another detail. People position themselves not just for warmth, but for order. The door area is often colder. The wall side is colder, near the hearth is warmer, but the hearth will not stay warm forever. So the sleeping cluster forms in a spot that balances those factors. It is an old skill, learned through repetition. You do not debate it. You do not test it. You accept the placement like you accept gravity. This is also where you begin to understand how winter nights change the concept of privacy. Conversations lower, movements become careful. If someone has to get up, everyone feels it. A baby fusses, and a mother shifts, and the whole blanket roof adjusts like a living thing. There is no pretending you are alone. Your life is witnessed, and you witness others. For many peasants, that is normal, even comforting in a hard season. For you, it is like being a guest in a very polite pile of humans. A quirky tidbit slips into your mind as you listen to the room settle. People sometimes believe that warmth could be influenced by more than cloth and fire. Some households kept small protective items near the sleeping area, not because the items produced heat, but because fear itself feels colder when it has no place to go. A charm, a whispered phrase, a small token tucked into a fold of fabric. It is not about logic. It is about calming the mind so the body can rest. And honestly, you get it. Anxiety is basically an invisible draft. A child presses against your side, warm in that intense way only children can be, as if they have a tiny furnace in their ribs. You hold still, because you do not want to disrupt the arrangement. You can feel the rhythm of breathing around you, layered and uneven at first, then gradually sinking into something slower. The room becomes a soft chorus of exhalations, like waves rolling in a dark harbour, but the comfort is never absolute. The cold keeps testing you. It creeps in through the underside of the straw. It slides along the wall. It settles on your shoulder if a blanket edge lifts. You keep adjusting, tiny movements, the medieval version of buffering your warmth connection. That is joke number 2. Because yes, your body is basically a low-speed internet router, and winter is demanding higher performance. Then, just as the household quiets, someone coughs again. It is not dramatic. It is the kind of cough that lives in a village all winter, moving from throat to throat like a visitor who refuses to leave. You think about how cold, smoke, and close quarters make illness more likely, and you feel a flicker of dread that you quickly tamp down. Sleep is needed, and dread is bad for insulation. You focus instead on what the closeness provides. Heat, obviously, but also a kind of security. In a world without streetlights or locks that would impress anyone, being together at night is a defence. A stranger at the door, an animal making noise outside, a sudden sound in the thatch. These are less terrifying when you can hear other breathing nearby. Even if you are poor, even if winter is cruel, you're not facing it alone. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants experienced this closeness primarily as community and comfort, or as constant stress and lack of autonomy. Because the emotional record is thin and filtered through later assumptions, you can feel both possibilities in the same moment. The warmth is real, the constraint is real, neither cancels the other. Your body starts to surrender. Muscles soften. The sting in your fingers dulls. You breathe more slowly, not because someone told you to, but because the group rhythm nudges you into it. Under the shared covers, the air is warmer now, and the boundary between you and everyone else becomes less important than the fact that you're all trying to make it through the night. You think, briefly, that this is the medieval version of a group project. Everybody contributes, nobody gets full credit, and if one person messes up the blanket arrangement, everyone suffers. That is joke number 3, and it is so accurate you almost smile. Your eyes close. The sounds fade into a soft, steady weave. The cold still exists, but it has been negotiated with, not defeated. You're not warm like a modern bedroom warm. You're warm like a living creature warm, wrapped in shared breath, wool, and the stubborn refusal to let winter win for free. Sleep comes in patches, because the straw beneath you has opinions. It pokes, it sags, it shifts like it is trying to remember what shape it is supposed to be. You wake with a stiff neck, not from stress, but from the simple fact that your pillow is basically whatever cloth you can spare, folded until it gives up. You shift carefully, and the straw crackles in protest, a dry little complaint that says, yes, you moved, and yes, everyone heard it. Now you are properly introduced to the peasant bed, which is less a product and more a seasonal construction project. The bedding is built from what the land offers: straw from grain, rushes from wetlands, bracken, dried leaves, sometimes even heather in places where it grows thick. It is stuffed into a ticking if the household has cloth to spare, or piled loose if they do not. The result is a mattress that smells like the last harvest, and feels like it was designed by a committee of sharp-edged plants. A mainstream historical fact slips in as you test the bedding with your elbow. Bed in medieval rural life often meant a straw-filled sack or heap, and keeping it fresh was real maintenance. Straw compresses, gets damp, and turns sour. Households would change or add bedding material as they could, often tied to the agricultural cycle. When you harvest, you're not only feeding yourself, you're also preparing your future sleep surface. Farming literally supports your dreams. You sit up slightly and run your fingers through the top layer, and it is immediately clear why this is not a spa experience. There are broken stalks, little seed heads, tiny bits of chaff. You can feel the grit that comes from dirt tracked in, because the floor is earth and the door opens to mud. The bedding is not isolated from daily life. It is part of it. The same hands that stack firewood and clean tools also fluff the straw and shake out blankets. Nothing in here gets to be purely for comfort. Then comes the itch. Right on schedule, it starts on your ankle, then your calf, then your wrist. You do not see anything, but you do not need to. You know the cast of characters that like straw, fleas, lice, mites, little hitchhikers who treat your body like a heated inn with no checkout time. You clamp down on the instinct to scratch wildly, because if you do, you will feel like you're auditioning for a role as person who loses a fight with invisible dots. This is where a quirky tidbit arrives. Both unsettling and weirdly clever. Some households use strongly scented plants in bedding or around it, like wormwood or other herbs, believing the smell could discourage pests. Sometimes it likely helped a little. Sometimes it was more hope than science. But the effort itself is a form of control. You cannot command winter, but you can at least try to keep your sleeping pile from becoming a tiny ecosystem. You slide a hand under the straw and feel dampness where body heat meets cold air and turns into moisture. Damp is the secret enemy. Cold you can brace against. Damp steals warmth quietly. It seeps, it clings, it makes wool heavier and straw sour. The bedding needs to breathe, but the cottage does not have the dry, heated air of modern life. Everything is in a constant tug of war with humidity, so the household does what it can. During daylight, if the weather allows, bedding can be aired, straw can be turned, blankets can be shaken. On a lucky day, the door stays open for a while, letting smoke drift out and fresh air drift in. On an unlucky day, the door stays shut and the air feels used, like it has already been breathed too many times. You learn another trick. The sleeping surface is not just straw, it is straw plus layers. A coarse cloth on top. Maybe a woolen coverlet if the family can spare it. Every layer is an attempt to smooth the sharpness and keep the warmth from leaking down into the earth. You realise that the ground is always hungry for heat. It wants what your body makes. It wants to pull it away and keep it. The bedding is a barrier between you and that theft. You shift again, carefully, and discover the straw is compressed into a shallow dip where you have been lying. That dip is not comfortable, but it does something useful. It cups your body and reduces airflow around you. In modern terms, it is a terrible mattress. In medieval terms, it is a clumsy but functional nest. You listen to the soft sounds of the household. Someone mutters in sleep. Someone's stomach growls and then stops. A baby makes a small noise like a question and then settles. The straw continues its tiny creaks, like it is speaking its own language. You start to match your movement to the sound, shifting only when the room's other noises cover it, because you do not want to disturb the group. You are learning the etiquette of shared sleeping, which is basically move like a cat, complain like a monk, and accept that comfort is not the goal. Historians still argue whether the poorest peasants slept mostly on loose straw heaps or more often had straw-stuffed sacks. because evidence varies by region and period, and written records tend to describe what someone thought was notable, rather than what was normal. Archaeology offers hints, but textiles rot, and straw does not leave tidy proof. What you do know, in your bones, is that the bedding is shaped by what people can afford and what the local landscape provides. There is no universal medieval mattress brand. There is just improvisation. Your mind wanders to the labour hidden inside this bed. Straw does not appear by magic. It comes from threshing, from separating grain, from carrying bundles, from storing them. Every stalk under you once stood in a field, and hands cut it down. Even your discomfort is the product of work. That is a strangely humbling thought, and it makes you less annoyed when a sharp bit of straw tries to tattoo your hip. You decide to do what peasants do. You make peace with it. You tuck a fold of cloth under your side to blunt the poking. You pull the blanket tighter. You turn your face toward the warmer air trapped near the shared covers. You keep your hands inside the shelter of fabric, because bare fingers lose heat quickly. Then you do the most medieval thing of all. You stop expecting the world to cater to you. Still, your body finds small joys. The straw smells faintly of summer fields, even in winter. There is a soft rustle when you settle, like dry grass in a breeze. When you close your eyes, you can almost pretend you're lying outdoors in a warmer season, except your nose immediately reminds you that the air is cold enough to sting. The imagination tries, the climate refuses. That is joke number one, because your brain is basically a liar with good intentions. A new itch flares, and you try a different tactic. You press the itchy spot against the straw and rub gently. A quiet scratch that does not require dramatic arm movement. It works just enough to keep you sane. You can see how habits form. You can see how people learn to coexist with discomfort without letting it become the main story. At some point, you realize the straw is also insulation. Air trapped between stalks slows heat loss. That is the secret, not softness. Air. The same principle as modern insulation, just executed with a bundle of plants and a prayer. You almost want to congratulate the straw for being useful, and then it pokes you again, and you retract the compliment. That is joke number two, because even your gratitude gets bullied tonight. You roll slightly and find a spot where the straw is warmer, packed down and less sharp. You exhale, your shoulders drop. The room is still cold, but the bed is doing its job as well as it can. It is not luxury. It is a tool, and as you drift back towards sleep, you accept the final truth of this bedding. It is never finished. It is always being rebuilt, refreshed, turned, replaced. It is seasonal. It is temporary. It is as alive as everything else in a peasant home, changing with time, weather, and the constant trust and stubborn effort to make winter nights survivable. That thought is oddly comforting. Not because it makes you warmer, but because it makes the struggle feel structured. You are not helpless. You are part of a long practice of making do, one straw stalk at a time. You let your eyes close fully and settle into the rustling nest. And the itch, for the moment, retreats. Night squeezes the cottage tighter, and the cold tries a new tactic. Instead of biting at your hands and feet, it starts creeping into the seams of your clothes, finding every loose cuff, every gap at the neck, every spot where fabric thins from years of use. You wake enough to notice your shoulders tensing, as if your body is trying to fold itself smaller. Then you remember the one rule that matters now. You do not chase warmth by removing layers. You chase warmth by choosing the right ones. You become aware of the materials against your skin. Linen is smooth, a little crisp even when it is worn thin. It feels clean compared to everything else in the room, and that is probably why people like it. But linen is not warm. Linen is honest. It tells you the truth about the temperature, and the truth is rude. Wool, on the other hand, is a liar in the nicest way. It tells your body, hey, we are fine, we are safe, and it does that by trapping air and holding heat close. When you pull a woolen cloak higher, the scratchy fibers catch and cling, sealing tiny pockets of warmth like miniature rooms. You can feel the difference immediately, not as a dramatic blast of heat, but as a quiet reduction in how fast you lose it. A mainstream historical fact anchors the moment. Wool was the backbone of medieval clothing for much of Europe, especially for warmth and durability. And rural households often relied on home production like spinning and weaving to keep everyone clothed, even if a family bought cloth at market sometimes. The day-to-day reality is that textile work was constant. Warmth had to be made thread by thread. You adjust your clothing with small, careful movements. You tuck your shirt deeper into your belt. You pull your woolen outer layer so it overlaps at the front, because open edges are basically invitations to the cold. You wrap a strip of cloth around your lower legs if you have it, because calves lose heat, and cold calves make your whole body feel offended. The household does this without thinking. You copy them like an apprentice learning a craft. You also notice something that feels strange from a modern perspective. Sleeping dressed is normal here. Not just because it is cold, but because undressing would expose skin to air that has no mercy. Clothing becomes bedding, cloaks become blankets, spare tunics become extra layers. If you have one good wool garment, it is not fashion, it is survival equipment. Then comes the head. You feel heat leaking upward, and you understand why people keep something on their hair at night. A cap, a hood, a coif, a simple wrap. The fabric around your head makes the air near your ears warmer, and that tiny comfort feels huge. Also, it makes you look like a medieval mushroom, which is not ideal for self-esteem but is fantastic for thermal efficiency. That is joke number 1. And you keep it quiet because the room is full of sleeping people and sleeping pride. The wool is not soft like modern merino. It is coarse and hard-working. It scratches your neck, and you have to decide whether the itch is worse than the cold. You choose the itch, because at least the itch does not freeze your thoughts. You shift the wool slightly so it rubs less, and you learn the art of compromise again. A quirky tidbit sneaks in as you listen to someone nearby rustle a blanket. People sometimes believed certain colours or weaves had protective qualities, not just social meaning, a particular pattern, a certain kind of knot, a strip of cloth tied in a specific way. Part of it is tradition, part of it is superstition, part of it is the human urge to believe that skill and intention can add a layer where fabric cannot, even if it does nothing physically. It can calm a mind that is trying to sleep while winter drums its fingers on the walls. You pay attention to how the blankets are arranged. There is no fluffy duvet, there is weight. Woolen blankets can be heavy, and that weight matters. It presses down, reducing drafts, keeping the warm air from escaping too easily. It also makes rolling over feel like a small workout, which is hilarious in a depressing way. You try to turn and the blanket resists like it is saying, "Are you sure you want to do that?" That is joke number 2. Because your bedding is basically a medieval personal trainer and its only exercise is stay still, you pull the blanket edge under your shoulder to seal a gap. You notice how quickly your body responds when a draft is blocked. The cold is not an even blanket over the room. It is a collection of sneaky fingers poking at you through openings. The household knows this, so they focus on sealing. They tuck fabric into cracks, overlap layers, and make little barriers. You realise that warmth is less about adding heat and more about preventing loss. Your mind wanders to the idea of textile value. Cloth is not cheap, and it does not appear easily. Spinning takes time, weaving takes time, mending takes time. A ripped garment is not an annoyance. It is a hole in your night's defence. So people repair constantly, patching elbows, reinforcing seams, reusing old fabric for wraps and ties. In winter, a patch is not just thrift, it is insulation management. Historians still argue whether most peasants owned enough textiles to layer effectively in the harshest winters, because inventory lists that survive often reflect households with slightly more means, and poorer families leave fewer records. Some evidence suggests minimal wardrobes for many, while other evidence points to communities where wool production was widespread enough to provide basic layering. What you feel in your own situation is the truth that even a single wool layer changes everything, and not having it would be brutal. You listen to breathing around you, slow and steady, and you realise how clothing also becomes a social marker even at night. Someone with a thicker cloak has more warmth. Someone with a thin wrap has less. The cold does not care about fairness, but humans do. At least a little. A mother pulls a blanket edge toward a child. An older sibling shifts so the smaller body is more covered. The household distributes warmth the way it distributes food, by need and by love and by whatever arguments happened earlier that day. Winter makes generosity visible. Your own body begins to settle again. The scratch of wool becomes background noise. The linen beneath it feels cool but not shocking. You find a position where the layers overlap well, and you hold it. Your breathing slows, and with each exhale, the warm air under the covers becomes slightly more stable. It is like building a tiny climate, breath by breath. Then a cold spot touches your shoulder, and you realize the blanket has slipped. You fix it with a tiny tug, careful not to disturb anyone. This is the rhythm of the night. Seal, settle, leak, reseal. Your brain starts to treat it like a normal task, the way you might adjust a pillow in a modern bed without thinking. Here, the adjustment is a small act of defense. You feel the weight of the blanket again and let it press you into stillness. You wonder how anyone slept deeply with this much awareness. And then you remember that the body can get used to almost anything if the alternative is misery. People do not thrive on discomfort, but they adapt. They learn which fabrics help, which folds matter, which wraps keep the cold from climbing their spine. As your eyes close, you think about how strange it is that wool, a thing made from sheep, becomes the difference between a tolerable night and a punishing one. You picture the shearing, the washing, the carding, the spinning, the weaving. A whole chain of labour becomes a blanket, and the blanket becomes a chance to sleep. The medieval winter is not softened by technology. It is softened by work, by animals, by skill, and by the quiet intelligence of layering. You settle into the heavy warmth you have built from linen and wool, and for a while, the cold is kept at the edges, forced to wait. The cottage goes quieter in the deep part of the night, the hour when even your thoughts feel muffled. The fire has faded from flame to a low, red pulse, like a sleepy eye refusing to close completely. You can sense its weakness without even looking. Heat in this world is not a constant service. It is a creature that needs feeding, and right now it is trying to survive on leftovers. You lift your head just enough to see the hearth. A few coals glow under a dusting of ash. The ash is not just waste. It is a lid. It slows the coals from dying too fast, holding a little heat inside, stretching the last warmth like a household stretching the last loaf of bread. You learn that the fire is managed, not simply used. A mainstream historical fact settles into place. Many medieval households practiced banking the fire, covering embers with ash or larger pieces of fuel so the heat would linger, and the fire could be revived in the morning without starting from nothing. Starting a fresh fire could be slow and difficult, especially with damp winter wood. Keeping embers alive is a kind of night insurance. You shift carefully and watch an adult rise, moving with that half-awake precision that avoids stepping on hands or bowls. They go to the hearth and kneel. The movement is quiet, practiced, a small poke with a stick, a tiny rearrangement. They are not trying to create a blaze. They are trying to keep the option of flame alive. In modern terms, it is like keeping your phone on 1% battery, except the phone is your ability to cook, to warm, to see, and to feel human. The person cups a hand near the embers, not touching, just feeling. The heat is faint but real. They place a thicker chunk of wood or peat nearby, close enough to dry a little, not close enough to smother everything. Fuel is stored where it can stay dry as anything can in a damp cottage. Wood that is too wet smokes and refuses to burn properly. Smoke stings eyes, coats lungs, and turns the room into a slow argument between warmth and breathing. You notice that nobody talks about the fire like it is pretty. It is a tool, but it is also a risk. Sparks can jump, thatch can catch. An unattended flame in a small room is an invitation to disaster, so the household treats it with respect that borders on fear. They keep it small at night because a big fire would eat fuel too fast and could invite accidents. The warmth you want is limited by the dangers you cannot afford. This is where you feel the harsh truth in your own body. The warmest part of the night is not midnight. It is the beginning, when the hearth is active and your clothes have absorbed some heat. As the hours pass, you are not getting warmer. You are trying to lose heat more slowly. That is a different goal. and your muscles understand it. They pull inward, your hands curl, your knees draw up, making your body smaller, tighter. If you could fold yourself into a pocket, you would. A quirky tidbit drifts through the air with the smoke. In some regions, people believed it was unlucky to let the hearth go completely cold. Not just because it was inconvenient, but because the hearth symbolized the life of the household. The embers were a kind of heartbeat. Letting them die could feel like letting fortune slip away. Practicality and belief braid together, and it makes sense. When survival is thin, everything that helps you hold on becomes sacred. You hear a faint crackle as a coal collapses. The sound is tiny but meaningful. It is a reminder that time is passing and resources are shrinking. The person tending the hearth rubs their hands, then returns to the sleeping cluster. They do not bring a new wave of warmth with them. They bring the reassurance that morning will not begin with desperate friction and damp kindling. It is a quiet victory. You start thinking about fuel itself, about what gets burned in peasant winter. Wood, yes, if you have access. In some places, peat cut from bogs, dried into blocks, and stacked like dark bricks. Sometimes dried dung, especially where trees are scarce. Sometimes crop residues, though those burn fast and can be smoky. Each fuel has a smell and a behaviour. Peat gives a steady heat but takes effort to harvest and dry. Dung burns but carries a distinctive aroma that makes you understand why medieval people appreciated fresh air whenever they could get it. You imagine explaining to someone that you slept in a room warmed by dried cow poop, and they would make a face like they just bit a lemon. Meanwhile, you would be like, yes, and it worked. And you are welcome. That is joke number 1, and the absurdity of it almost warms you by itself. The cold keeps nibbling. Your breath feels cooler on the inhale now. You can tell the air temperature has dropped. The walls feel like they're radiating chill, and the thatch above seems to whisper with wind movement. You tuck your chin down to reduce exposed skin. You pull wool closer to your throat. You understand why people develop habits like sleeping with their head covered, even though it makes the air feel stuffy. Stuffiness is a small price for keeping your nose from becoming an icicle. You also understand how the hearth shapes the layout of the room. Even at night, the sleeping area is positioned with the fire in mind, but not too close. Too close risks sparks and heat damage, and the air near the hearth can be smoky. Too far and you lose the only meaningful heat source. The household has found a balance through experience. The room is arranged like a lesson taught over generations. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants generally had consistent access to enough fuel in severe winters, because access depended on local ecology, legal rights, and economic pressures. Some communities had abundant wood and common rights. Others faced restrictions, fines, and scarcity. There are records of disputes over gathering wood, and those disputes are not petty. They are winter survival in legal form. You drift into a light sleep and then wake again, because your body is monitoring conditions like a night watchman. You can sense when the blanket edge shifts, when a draft sneaks in, when the air gets too cold. Your sleep becomes a series of small descents and small returns. It is not restful like a modern night with steady warmth. It is functional. It keeps you alive. At some point, you hear the faintest sound outside, maybe a branch moving or an animal shifting in the dark. The household does not panic. Nobody sits up. They are used to the night making noises, but you feel your heart speed up for a moment, and you realize how the fire, even when small, is a psychological anchor. Light means safety. Heat means life. A dark, cold room would feel like the world has ended. You stare at the embers again, the last red freckles under grey ash. You feel a strange respect for the household's patience. They do not expect comfort. They expect effort. They accept that the night cools and the fire fades, and they plan for it. They bank embers, tuck fuel close, ration warmth, and trust that morning tasks will restart the cycle. You let your eyes close again, holding on to the faint pulse of the hearth as if it is a promise. You settle deeper into your layers, breathing slowly, letting your body conserve what it can. The cold remains present, but it has to negotiate with the stubborn little island of heat that the household has kept alive. One ember at a time, a new smell slides into the room. warmer and heavier than smoke. It is earthy, musky, and unmistakably alive. Your sleepy brain tries to label it as farm, and then realizes that is not a category. It is a lifestyle. You open your eyes a little and notice shapes in the dimness that are not human. A flank, a horn curve, the slow, patient movement of an animal shifting its weight. This is where medieval winter living gets truly honest. If you have animals, their heat is not wasted outside. They are wealth, food, labour, and, in a season like this, they are also space heaters that breathe. You listen carefully and hear it. A soft snort, a hoof scrape, the faint clink of a tether. The animals are close enough that their warmth touches the air of the cottage, adding a subtle layer of temperature that feels almost like someone turned the world's dial up by half a notch. It is not dramatic. It is not cozy in the modern sense. But your body notices the difference, the way it notices a small windbreak on a cold hill. A mainstream historical fact locks in. In many parts of medieval Europe, peasant houses were built with humans and animals in close proximity, sometimes with animals in a byre attached to the living space or separated by a thin partition. This arrangement helped protect livestock from theft and weather, and it could contribute to warmth in winter. You are not imagining it. Animal body heat is a resource. You shift, careful not to attract attention, and you look toward the partition. It is not a solid wall. It is boards, woven hurdles, or whatever the household can manage. Gaps exist. Air moves through. That means warmth moves too, and also smells, sounds, and the occasional reminder that animals have digestive systems with their own agenda. A cow exhales, slow and deep. The breath rolls out like fog. It is strangely soothing, like a giant creature is sighing you towards sleep. Then you catch the sharper edge beneath it. Manure. You realize this arrangement is a deal. You get warmth, but you also get the atmosphere of a barn. You cannot have one without the other. You imagine a modern product review. 5 stars. Very warm. 1 star. Smells like a cow wrote it. That is joke number 1. And you keep it silent because laughter would just make you inhale more barn air. The household treats the animals as normal neighbours. Someone gets up, half asleep, and checks a tether with a gentle hand. It is not sentimental, it is practical. A loose animal at night can cause chaos. A cow stepping wrong can ruin stored goods or injure someone. Keeping animals calm is part of keeping people safe. Winter is already unstable. You do not add surprise livestock drama if you can avoid it. You also notice how the animals change the soundscape. Humans breathe softly. Animals breathe loudly. Their noises punctuate the night, turning the cottage into a shared shelter with multiple species. In a weird way, it feels like security if something approaches outside. Animals might react, a dog might bark, a cow might shift, a goose, if present, might scream like it has seen the end of the world, which is both annoying and, technically, an alarm system. A quirky tidbit drifts into your mind. Some medieval folk beliefs treated certain animals as protective in a spiritual sense, not just practical. A dog at the threshold, a cat near the hearth, a cow's steady presence. People sometimes read omens in animal behaviour, especially during harsh winters when every unusual sound feels meaningful. Whether or not the beliefs are true, the emotional effect is real. It gives the mind a pattern to hold on to in the dark. You think about the economics of it all. Not every peasant household has large livestock. Keeping a cow requires fodder, space, and investment. Some families have a pig. Some have a few goats. Some have chickens. The warmer the animal, the bigger the benefit, but also the bigger the responsibility. A cow is like owning a very large, very warm bank account that can also kick you. You watch the cow shift again, and you respect the danger. Even calm animals can be unpredictable. In a dim room, one startled movement can be disastrous. That is why tethers and partitions matter. The household knows the animal's temperament the way you know the temperament of a moody appliance, except this appliance has muscles. You also begin to understand how animals affect air quality. More bodies in a closed space means more moisture. More moisture means colder feeling cold. It is a complicated trade. The warmth helps, but the dampness can hurt. The smell is not just unpleasant, it is information. This room is full of living processes, and winter forces them all into tight quarters. Historians still argue whether the warming benefit of animals indoors was significant enough to be a deliberate strategy everywhere, or whether proximity was mostly about protection and convenience, with warmth as a side effect. The answer likely varies by region, by building style, and by the kind of animals kept. What you feel in your own skin is that even a small lift in temperature matters when the alternative is relentless chill. A goat bleats softly, a little complaint that sounds like it is narrating its own discomfort. You sympathise. Then you remember goats are famous for eating anything, including things you care about, and your sympathy becomes cautious. That is joke number 2. Because the goat is basically a medieval roommate who will absolutely eat your homework. Someone in the household murmurs and tosses slightly, and the shared blankets shift. The animal warmth becomes a background presence. Like a low fire you do not have to feed. You start to appreciate how the household survival is layered. Hearth heat, human heat, animal heat, wool insulation, straw bedding. None of it is enough alone. Together, it forms a system. Your mind starts noticing the ways animals contribute beyond heat. Their manure can be used as fertilizer. In some places, dried dung can be burned as fuel. Their milk becomes butter and cheese, dense foods that help people keep weight through winter. Their labour in warmer seasons supports the harvest that creates bedding and clothing. Even while you lie here, listening to a cow breathe, you're inside a network of interdependence that stretches across seasons and fields. You feel a flicker of gratitude, and then the smell reminds you to keep that gratitude abstract. That is joke number 3, because yes, you can be thankful and disgusted at the same time. And medieval winter is great at producing that emotional combo. The animal shifts again, and the air near the partition feels slightly warmer. You tuck your hands closer to your chest and let that warmth be a quiet help. You do not romanticize it. You simply accept it as one more tool in the peasant winter toolbox. Your eyelids grow heavier. The room's sounds blend together. Slow human breathing. Slow animal breathing. The faint settling of straw. The distant whisper of wind outside. In the darkness, the animals are not separate from the household struggle. They are part of it. Living and warm and inconvenient and valuable, sharing the night because winter makes everyone negotiate space, smell, and survival. You let the rhythm of those larger breaths pull you down into sleep again, as if the whole cottage is one creature, exhaling steadily against the cold. Your head is wrapped, and suddenly you understand why sleep in winter has a dress code. The cloth around your scalp makes the world feel less sharp. Without it, the cold seems to sip heat straight from your skull like it is tasting soup. With it, the air near your ears becomes softer, and the tiny muscles in your face unclench in relief. In this cottage, bedtime is not the moment you become a soft, pyjama-clad cloud. Bedtime is the moment you become a carefully bundled parcel. Every fold matters. Every knot matters. People do not just lie down and hope. They prepare, the way you would prepare for a storm. You watch how the household treats headwear. A simple linen coif ties under the chin. A wool cap sits snug and low. A hood is pulled up even indoors. It looks almost funny to your modern eye, like everyone is auditioning for the role of sleepy monk number 3. But it works. The head is a big place for heat loss. Not because of a magical rule, but because it is often uncovered while the rest of the body is layered. Cover it, and the whole body feels more stable. A mainstream historical fact fits neatly here. Head coverings were extremely common in medieval Europe for both men and women, often worn daily for social reasons and practicality, and they could be kept on at night in cold conditions. This is not a special winter fashion trend. It is normal clothing used strategically. You tug your own wrap a little tighter. The fabric scratches your forehead, but you do not mind. You start noticing other sleep fashion details. Some people keep a belt on, not because belts are cozy, but because it keeps layers tucked and prevents drafts from sneaking up your spine. Some people wrap their feet in spare cloth, creating a soft boot inside the blanket. Some people pull a cloak around their shoulders like a portable wall. The shapes of sleepers become rounded, bundled, and slightly ridiculous. You think of a pile of wrapped bread loaves, each one trying not to go stale. That is joke number 1, and it makes you almost smile, which immediately reminds you that smiling in cold air feels like your cheeks are cracking. You also notice how clothing is arranged for quick movement. Winter nights can bring emergencies, a child crying, an animal shifting, a strange noise outside, a pot tipping near the hearth. People do not want to spend precious seconds fumbling with separate garments in the dark. They sleep prepared to stand. That readiness is part of the strategy. You can feel it in the way shoes are placed near the sleeping area, in the way a cloak can be grabbed and thrown on in one motion. Sleep is not defenseless. Sleep is just quieter. A quirky tidbit slips in with a whisper of superstition. Some people believe that certain knots or pins placed in clothing could ward off harm or bad dreams. A small metal pin at the collar, a knotted string tucked inside a hood, a charm sewn into a seam. The line between practical fastening and protective habit gets blurry in winter. When the mind is most vulnerable to fear, even if it is only comfort for the spirit, comfort still matters. You shift and feel the blanket press against your wrapped head. It is warmer there now. Your breath makes a tiny pocket of heat, but also a tiny pocket of dampness. You learn to angle your face so your breath does not soak the fabric too much. Too much moisture turns warmth into chill. You become an expert in micro-adjustments, moving a finger width at a time, as if you are tuning a complicated instrument. Then you experience the other side of sleep fashion. Restriction, a tight wrap can itch, a hood can pull at your neck. A coif tied under the chin can make you feel like you are wearing a gentle but persistent reminder to behave. You try to loosen it, and the cold rushes in like an offended guest who has been waiting outside. You tighten it again immediately. The lesson is clear. Freedom is nice, but warmth is nicer. Historians still argue whether most peasants considered sleeping in headwear and layered clothing to be the norm in winter, or a response to unusually harsh conditions. Because personal habits rarely make it into records unless someone is criticizing them. Some writers describe rural living as rough and cramped, but they do not always describe the exact bedtime routine. The routine is learned in families, not written in books. You become aware of how social rules shape clothing even at night. Women's hair is often kept covered. Men may keep caps on. Modesty is woven into fabric choices, and winter makes that modesty practical. If you stay covered, you stay warmer. A culture that already expects covering finds it easier to use clothing as insulation. You realize that customs can be protective in more than one way. A child nearby squirms and their hood slips back. An adult reaches over without opening their eyes, tucks it back into place, and pats the child's head with a hand that moves like it has done this 1,000 times. The gesture is so calm it feels like part of sleep itself. You feel something in your chest soften, not because the situation is easy, but because care still exists in hard conditions. Your mind wanders to the oddity of sleeping in what amounts to outdoor gear. If you tried this at home, you would wake up sweaty, tangled, and annoyed. Here, sweating is not the problem. Here, the risk is cooling too far. You realize you're always balancing. Too cold is dangerous. Too damp is also dangerous. Warmth has to be steady, not intense. You itch again, this time at your scalp under the wrap. You cannot scratch properly without undoing your careful setup. You try to ignore it, then you gently press the edge of your wrap and rub. It helps a little. You feel like you're negotiating with your own head. That is joke number 2, because yes, your scalp is now a political faction. Somewhere in the room, a sleeper mutters something that could be a prayer or could be a complaint. In the darkness, it is hard to tell. You understand why winter nights produce more whispered words. When you cannot control the temperature, you try to control your feelings about it. You try to turn the night into something you can endure with a sense of meaning. You also begin to appreciate how these clothing choices are shaped by what people own. A household with more wool can wrap more thoroughly. A household with only thin cloth has fewer options. This is not just comfort. It is inequality measured in layers. And yet, even with limited cloth, people get creative, doubling fabric, using old rags as wraps. stuffing a hood with a bit of dry grass for padding, tying cloth tighter to seal gaps. That last one makes you grin, because the medieval solution to a draft is essentially tie it harder. That is joke number 3, and it is also pretty much the solution to many medieval problems. You settle again, your head covered, your neck sealed, your shoulders wrapped. The cold outside can do what it wants, inside your little bundle. You have built a smaller world, one where warmth does not need a machine, only fabric, habit, and the quiet discipline of not wasting heat. Your breathing slows. The scratch of wool becomes distant. The wrap around your head holds steady. You drift into sleep dressed not for dreams, but for winter. You wake because the air tastes wrong. It is not just cold, it is smoky, thick, and a little bitter, like the night has been simmering inside the cottage and forgot to crack a window. Your eyes blink open and sting immediately. You breathe in by accident, cough once, then try to breathe more shallowly, as if you can sip air instead of drinking it. This is the other half of peasant winter sleeping. Warmth is tangled with ventilation, and neither side wins cleanly. If you keep the cottage tight to hold heat, smoke and dampness build up. If you open it to clear the air, cold rushes in and steals the little warmth you have gathered. The household lives in that compromise every night. A mainstream historical fact sits right in the centre of this. Many medieval rural homes had open hearths, and in some cases the smoke vented through the roof or gaps rather than a well-built chimney. Chimneys existed in the medieval period, but they were not universal for peasants, and even where a flue existed, smoke often lingered indoors. That means sleep happens in air that is not exactly spare quality. You shift your face away from the worst of it. The smoke is not evenly distributed. It hangs in layers, low to the ground. The air can be clearer. Higher up, it can be worse. You learn to keep your head lower, tucked into the warm pocket under the covers, not just for heat, but for breathing. It feels strange, like you are a creature trying to survive in a cave full of invisible fog. You listen to the room. Nobody panics. The household has felt this 1,000 times. Someone stirs and adjusts a piece of wood at the hearth, trying to reduce smoke by improving the burn. Someone else nudges the door open a finger width, just enough to let a thread of fresh air in without turning the cottage into an icebox. That tiny crack becomes a lifeline and an insult at the same time. A cold draft snakes across the floor, and you feel it touch your ankles. The draft is sharp, clean, and cruel. Your body wants to pull the door shut instantly. Your lungs want the door open wider. Congratulations. You are now 2 different people arguing in the same body. That is joke number 1, and it is the kind of joke winter tells you by force. You also notice the way the cottage itself behaves. Wattle and daub walls breathe a little. Thatch roofs let tiny amounts of air pass through. Gaps exist around the door, around the eaves, around any place where wood meets mud. The structure is not airtight by design, because truly sealing a house is hard, and also because smoke needs somewhere to go. At the same time, those gaps are exactly how cold keeps sneaking in. The house is like a sweater with holes. It still helps, but you keep wishing someone would patch it. The household does patch it, in their way. You see rags stuffed into cracks. You see straw pushed into a gap near the door. You see a hanging cloth that acts like a primitive curtain, cutting the draft when the door opens. These are small defences. None of them are perfect, but each one shaves a little cruelty off the night. A quirky tidbit arrives with the sting in your eyes. People sometimes use smoke intentionally for preservation, hanging meat or fish where the smoke would curl and dry it, turning the problem into a benefit. The same smoky environment that makes your throat feel scratchy can help keep food from spoiling. It is not comfortable, but it is useful. Medieval life loves that kind of trade. If something is unpleasant, someone will figure out how to make it productive. You focus on your breathing. Small inhalations through the nose, slow exhalations. You can taste soot. Your throat feels coated. You understand how people could develop chronic coughs, and you also understand why winter sickness can spread easily in a crowded room with damp air. The cold itself stresses bodies. The smoke stresses lungs. The closeness shares germs. The season stacks problems like firewood. Historians still argue how much indoor smoke contributed to long-term health issues in medieval populations, because direct medical records are limited and modern comparisons are imperfect. But the logic is hard to ignore. Night after night, winter after winter, breathing smoky air would not be kind to anyone's lungs. You shift your head lower and find a clearer pocket under the covers. It is warmer and easier to breathe, but the air is also more used, heavy with the humidity of breath. You can feel moisture gathering in the cloth, and you do not like it. Damp cloth chills faster, yet lifting your head exposes you to smoke. You have to choose your discomfort. A child coughs nearby, not a dramatic cough, just a little bark, then silence. An adult pats their back, slow and practiced, as if comfort is delivered through touch rather than words. The coughing stops. The room returns to its slow rhythm. You notice how people time their ventilation. They are not opening the door randomly. They do it when the fire smokes most, or when the air feels thickest. They do it briefly, then close it again. They accept short bursts of cold to prevent longer suffering from smoke. That is a kind of intelligence, learned without charts or gadgets, learned by paying attention. You also realize how darkness affects it. In the day, you can see smoke patterns. At night, you feel them. You become sensitive to tiny changes in smell and sting. Your body becomes the monitor. Your eyes and throat do the measuring. Someone shifts near the hearth and the smoke thins slightly. The burn improves. Your eyes stop watering as much. You take one deeper breath and regret it immediately. That is joke number 2, because your lungs are basically like, nice try, hero, and then they punish you for ambition. The draft returns as the door cracks again. You feel it curl around the edges of the sleeping cluster, searching for gaps like a thief looking for an unlocked window. You seal your own gap by tucking cloth under your chin and pressing your elbow against your side. The cold gives up on you and goes hunting elsewhere. You think about how modern comfort often means sealing everything tight and controlling air with machines. Here, air is uncontrolled. It moves as it wants. Smoke moves with it. Moisture moves with it. The household reacts rather than commands. Their solutions are physical and simple. Patch, tuck, hang, crack the door, bank the fire, shift your body, cover your face, and yet, somehow, sleep still happens. Not in spite of this, but alongside it. People learn to fall asleep with a slight sting in the eyes, with a faint cough in the background, with the knowledge that the air is not ideal. They save their energy for work and survival, and their bodies get used to what you would call unacceptable. A final thought drifts through your mind as you settle again. This house is not airtight because airtightness is not the goal. The goal is to keep enough warmth to endure, and enough airflow to breathe, and enough dryness to avoid turning everything into cold, wet misery. The balance is messy. It is never perfect. It changes with wind direction, with fuel type, with how many bodies are inside, with whether the roof is damp. You tuck your face into a warmer pocket and let your breathing slow again. Smoke still exists, but it is thinner now. The draft still exists, but you have sealed your edges. In this dim room, you learn that winter sleeping is not a single solution. It is a constant adjustment, an ongoing negotiation with air itself. Your stomach speaks first, a lowest, empty sound that feels louder in the quiet. It is not just hunger. It is a reminder that warmth is partly something you burn inside yourself. If your body is a little furnace, food is the fuel. In winter, sleep and diet stop being separate topics. They become roommates. You lie still and notice how your limbs feel heavier when you are underfed, how your fingers cool faster, how your thoughts get sharp and irritable. A full belly does not magically heat a cottage, but it gives your body the resources to keep its core temperature steady while everything outside tries to drain it away. A mainstream historical fact settles in gently. Medieval peasants relied heavily on grains like rye, barley, oats, and sometimes wheat, often in the form of bread, pottage, and ale, with winter diets leaning on stored foods. When fresh vegetables are scarce, you eat what keeps and what fills. That means lots of grain and legumes, preserved items, and whatever the household has managed to store. You start thinking like a peasant for a moment, and it is oddly practical. Eating late can help you sleep warmer, because digestion produces heat. It is not a modern hack. It is just how bodies work, but winter also makes food precious. You cannot always choose if supplies are thin. You do not eat for comfort. You eat for survival and for staying able to work. Someone in the household shifts and you smell it. The faint lingering scent of yesterday's meal on breath and cloth. Thick pottage, maybe. Made from grains simmered with peas or beans, sometimes with a little onion, sometimes with a bit of meat if luck or season provides it. The smell is humble, slightly sour, and comforting in a way that is hard to explain. It is the smell of calories. You realise peas are not a small detail. They are winter allies. Dried peas and beans store well, provide protein, and make a pot of grain feel more substantial. When the title of tonight's world includes peasants and peas, that is not just wordplay. It is diet. It is heat. It is the reason some bodies can keep the chill from reaching their bones. A quirky tidbit wanders in like a folk remedy. Some people believe certain foods helped warm the blood in winter, not just in terms of calories, but in terms of balancing the body's humours. Medieval medical thinking often described health as a balance of qualities like hot, cold, wet, and dry. Foods were thought to carry these qualities too. A warming spice, a hearty stew, a drink that feels hot going down. These could be seen as correcting winter's cold influence. Even if the humours are not modern science, the instinct to eat warming, filling foods is deeply sensible when nights are long and cruel. You notice how alcohol fits into it. Ale is common, not just for pleasure but because it can be safer than water and provides calories. It is not necessarily strong, often more like a nourishing drink. A small mug can take the edge off cold and relax the body into sleep. It can also make you feel warmer than you truly are, which is a dangerous trick. You can sweat under layers, then cool too fast. The body's furnace does not appreciate being fooled. You imagine yourself giving a medieval sleep tip. Drink ale, but do not let the ale gaslight you. That is joke number 1. And it makes you almost laugh because it sounds modern in the most ridiculous setting. Winter also brings fasting and feasting in a rhythm shaped by religion and calendar. Some days restrict animal products, some seasons encourage restraint. Yet there are also feast days when food is richer, when fat and meat appear more often, and those nights can feel different. A belly with more fat and protein sits heavy and slow, and the body radiates a steadier heat. Even sleep feels deeper, not because life is easier, but because the fuel tank is fuller. You think about fat in particular. In a world without central heating, fat is a kind of treasure. It is energy storage. It is the thing that keeps you from wasting away. It is also used for candles and cooking. It is comfort in multiple forms. The household does not waste it. They render it, they guard it, they stretch it. Then you think of hunger again, the opposite reality. If stores run low, if the harvest was poor, if illness reduced the ability to work, winter nights become harder. You feel cold more intensely when you have fewer calories. Your body starts conserving aggressively. It cools hands and feet to protect the core. Sleep becomes lighter and more fragmented because the body is alert for threats when it is underfed. Hunger is not just a daytime pain. Hunger follows you into the dark and lies beside you like a stone. Historians still argue how frequently medieval peasant communities faced true famine versus chronic scarcity, because conditions varied wildly by region and decade, and the word famine gets used differently in different records. Some years are manageable, some years are catastrophic. The records that survive often highlight the worst moments, but everyday thinness is harder to measure. You become aware of how winter food is tied to winter chores. Grain must be milled, firewood must be gathered, water must be carried, sometimes through snow. Those tasks burn calories, which then must be replaced. The household's daily math is constant. How much energy do we spend? How much do we have to eat? How much can we store? Sleep is part of that math too. A body that sleeps poorly works poorly. A body that works poorly gathers less fuel and less food. The cycle tightens. A child's stomach gurgles softly nearby, and you feel a wave of tenderness and worry. In winter, children need calories to grow and stay warm, but their small bodies lose heat faster. Adults try to protect them with layers and positioning, but food is the deeper protection. A bowl of pottage is as important as a blanket. You let your mind drift to the taste of winter food. It is often bland by modern standards, but it is steady. Salted meat, dried fish, hard cheese, onions, garlic, stored apples if any remained, maybe honey if the household is lucky, maybe herbs that still smell like summer. When a meal is hot, the heat itself is a gift. A warm bowl in your hands is like holding a tiny hearth. You sip it slowly, not because you are savouring, but because you want the warmth to last. Then you picture yourself trying to explain this to someone who complains about a slightly cold latte. You would stare at them with the patience of a medieval saint, and then quietly remove yourself from the conversation. That is joke number 2, and it is aimed at the part of you that still remembers modern whining. You shift under the blankets, and you feel your own body heat rising a little as your stomach settles. Even without a fresh meal, your body keeps working through what it has. You feel the slow burn of digestion like a gentle engine. It does not eliminate the cold, but it gives you a baseline. It makes the night less sharp. There is also the matter of timing. If the household eats earlier, the warmth from digestion may fade by the coldest hours. If they eat later, they risk staying awake longer, and fuel for cooking may be limited. Everything is a compromise. The household chooses what fits their labour and resources, their bodies then adapt. A final thought lands as you settle again. Winter sleep is not just a battle against the temperature of the room. It is a partnership with the temperature of your own body. Clothing and straw and fire help. But the deeper heat comes from inside, and inside heat depends on food, stored carefully from seasons that were kinder. You let your breathing slow, and you allow your body to use what fuel it has, warming you from the centre outward as you sink back towards sleep. That is joke number 3, very quiet, because your stomach has basically become the night's main character. The cold is not the only thing that keeps you awake. There is a mental edge to winter that you can feel even in the dark, even when your body is tucked into layers. It is the knowledge that so many things can go wrong quietly. A cough can become a fever, a spark can become a fire, a hungry animal can become a loss of wealth, a storm can collapse a roof. The night holds possibilities that daylight can at least argue with, so the household does what people have always done when they cannot control the world. They build small rituals to control their feelings about it. You hear it first as a whisper, a low murmur close to someone's chest. It might be a prayer. It might be a familiar phrase spoken every night. So practiced it no longer needs thought. Someone crosses themselves. Someone touches a small object tucked near the collar. The motions are minimal, barely visible, but they carry weight. In a world where winter can be ruthless, reassurance is not a luxury. It is a tool. A mainstream historical fact settles in. Christianity shaped daily life in medieval Europe deeply, and prayers and religious practices were part of routine for many people, including bedtime. Even for peasants with limited education, basic prayers, signs, and saintly devotions could be widely known, passed down in families and reinforced by parish life. Night is when those habits feel most necessary. You lie there and notice how the atmosphere changes when someone prays. It is not that the room gets warmer, it is that the mind becomes less restless. Your thoughts stop darting. You start to accept the night as something you can pass through, rather than something you must defeat. Then you notice the other side, the folk side, the things that do not come from church teaching but from older habits and village tradition. A bundle of herbs hung near the sleeping area, a small mark scratched on a beam, a charm tucked into a seam. These acts are quiet, private, often unspoken. They are the medieval version of checking the door twice or keeping your phone on silent. The point is not logic. The point is easing the nervous system. A quirky tidbit slips into focus. Some households believe that certain nights were more dangerous for bad dreams or wandering spirits, especially in deep winter when darkness lasts so long. People might place iron near the bed, because iron had a reputation for protection in many folk traditions. A small knife, a nail, a horseshoe fragment. Not for fighting, but for comfort. The object is a symbol. Symbols matter when the night is long. You imagine yourself clutching a nail like it is a security blanket, and you almost laugh. That is joke number 1. Then you remember the cold and the smoke and the vulnerability of this life. And the laughter turns into understanding. If a nail helps you sleep, the nail is doing its job. The household's anxiety is not dramatic. It is steady, like the wind outside. You can feel it in how carefully things are placed, how the embers are treated, how the door is checked, how water is kept in a spot that will not freeze too badly. Worry becomes organisation. Organisation becomes a comfort. You begin to notice sound as a trigger. A creak in the thatch, a scratch outside, a sudden animal shift. Each sound brings a tiny spike of alertness, then a slow settling back down. The mind does not fully turn off. It rests with one eye open, metaphorically and sometimes literally. That is not because people are paranoid. It is because the stakes are real. Historians still argue how much medieval peasants believed in specific supernatural threats versus using that language to describe ordinary fear. Because many sources come from clergy who recorded popular practices with bias, either criticising them or trying to reshape them. Some of what survives is filtered through disapproval, some is filtered through storytelling, but you can feel the psychological function clearly. Belief gives the mind a frame. A child stirs and makes a frightened noise, not quite a cry, more like a whimper that dissolves into breath. An adult reaches out and murmurs a soothing phrase. The phrase might be religious or might be simply affectionate. Either way, it works. The child settles. You realise that comfort in winter is often delivered through voice. A few words spoken softly can warm the mind the way a blanket warms the skin. Your own thoughts start to drift into the strange territory between waking and sleep, where the mind paints images and then forgets them. In this half state, the cottage feels like a little island of light in a sea of darkness. The sea is the winter world outside, full of unknowns. You can see why people might imagine things moving out there, because the darkness is so total. In villages with limited lighting, night can feel like a physical substance. You become aware of your heartbeat, steady but loud in your ears. You breathe slower, trying to calm it. The household's quiet rituals help you do that, even if you do not share the exact beliefs. The act of someone whispering a prayer is like a signal that the night is manageable. It tells your body, relax, this is normal, you're not alone. Then you think about protective saints, the way people might invoke them for specific dangers. A saint for illness, a saint for travellers, a saint for fire. Even if you do not know the names, you can sense the logic. When you cannot control everything, you divide the fear into categories and assign each category a helper. It is like creating a medieval customer service line for your anxieties. That is joke number 2. Because the mental image of calling a saint hotline in the middle of the night is ridiculous and somehow comforting. You also notice how winter encourages storytelling. In the dark, memories and warnings get repeated. A tale about someone who ignored a sign and suffered. A tale about a charm that worked. A tale about a storm that nearly took the roof. These stories shape behaviour. They teach caution. They also give the mind something to do besides worry. The story becomes a blanket for the brain. At some point you hear a faint tapping, maybe a branch against the wall. Your body tenses, then relaxes when nothing follows. You realise that even if you do not believe in spirits, your nervous system is wired to react to unknown sounds. The household's rituals are like a way of telling the nervous system, yes, we heard it. Yes, we have our protections. Now let go. A final small detail catches your attention. Someone keeps a small object close, perhaps a rosary bead, perhaps a carved token, perhaps just a smooth stone. Fingers worry it gently, rubbing it in a slow rhythm until sleep takes over. The object is warm from skin contact. It becomes a tiny anchor, something tangible in a night full of invisible threats. You feel your own mind soften. You stop scanning the darkness for problems. You let the quiet murmurs and small gestures do their work. Winter does not become friendly, but it becomes familiar. Familiar is easier to sleep with. You sink into the rhythm of breath around you, and your last waking thought is that in a world without guaranteed comfort, People invent comfort out of words, objects, and shared habits. That's joke number 3, whispered inside your head. Your bedtime routine is basically medieval emotional insulation, and honestly, it is doing a decent job. The winter outside does something new, something that feels less like a season and more like a takeover. The cold is no longer just nightly, it is daily, persistent, stubborn. Snow sits longer, rivers harden, the air carries that metallic bite that makes every inhale feel like you're chewing on a coin. You step out into the village morning and the world looks edited down to essentials. White ground, grey sky, dark branches, smoke rising straight up when the wind pauses. Even the usual muddy pathways have turned into ridged ice, and your feet have to learn carefulness fast. One wrong step and you go down, not in a dramatic, heroic way, but in the humiliating way that makes a neighbour laugh once and then offer a hand. A mainstream historical fact anchors what you are living through. From the late medieval period into the early modern era, Europe experiences periods of colder climate commonly associated with what later scholars call the Little Ice Age. With notable runs of severe winters and cool summers, it is not one single event, but a cluster of colder decades that hit agriculture, travel, and daily life. For peasants, this is not a climate chart. This is whether grain ripens, whether hay dries, and whether your stored food lasts until spring. The village reacts with a quiet tightening. People walk faster. They speak less outdoors because talking wastes warm breath. Their faces look chapped, red, and shiny with cold. Animals look miserable too, their breath steaming and their backs dusted with frost like they have been lightly sugared for a holiday that nobody asked for. You can almost hear the collective thought, please, not another week like this. The hardest part is how the cold complicates everything that keeps you alive. Water sources freeze, so you break ice to fill buckets. Washing becomes rare because wet cloth and cold air are a dangerous pairing. Tools are harder to grip with numb fingers. Wood is harder to gather because snow hides fallen branches. Food preparation slows because fuel is rationed and fire is fussy. Even walking to a neighbour's cottage feels like a mission that requires planning and layered clothing. You watch villagers make adjustments that would look like paranoia to a modern eye, but are simply sensible here. They store extra kindling indoors, not out of laziness, but because snow can bury your supply overnight. They keep a thicker layer of straw on the floor, not because it is pretty, but because the earth steals heat like a professional thief. They hang cloth over doorways, making little airlocks to block drafts. They move more tasks into daylight hours because night feels too risky when the cold is sharp enough to punish small mistakes. A quirky tidbit slips into your mind as you see people studying the sky. In some communities, folk weather lore becomes almost like a second religion during brutal winters. People read halos around the moon, the behaviour of birds, the way smoke rises, the crackle of ice. They trade predictions like currency. Some of it is observant and practical, some of it is superstition, but all of it is an attempt to pull the future closer and make it less frightening. When winter is intense, everyone becomes an amateur meteorologist with absolutely no instruments and a lot of confidence. The village talk is full of stories. Someone swears they remember a winter when wine froze in barrels, when carts could cross rivers that are usually dangerous. Another person insists that the cold now is worse, that the season has changed its nature. You can feel how memory stretches in hardship. Every winter becomes a reference point, a measuring stick, a warning. And historians still argue whether the harshest medieval winters described in chronicles reflect widespread reality or selective reporting. Because the most dramatic events are the ones that get written down, and different regions experience the cold differently. Some records may emphasize disaster to make moral points, while other suffering never gets recorded at all. What you do know is that even one unusually severe winter can reshape a household's future. You notice the agricultural tension immediately. Winter is supposed to be the season when fields rest, but it also sets the stage for what comes next. If the cold lingers too long, spring planting is delayed. If late frosts hit young shoots, yields drop. If summer stays cool and wet, grain can fail to ripen properly. A harsh winter is not only about sleeping warm, it is a domino that can knock over an entire year. You imagine trying to explain climate variability to someone carrying a frozen bucket of water up a slope. They would stare at you with the slow patience of someone who has no time for your fancy words, then say, in plain language, "It is cold and we are hungry." That is joke number 1, and it is also an excellent summary. Back inside, you feel the cold embedded in the walls, like the cottage has stored it overnight. The hearth struggles more because fuel burns but the room refuses to hold heat. You wrap tighter and still feel chilly, like the cold has found a shortcut through your defences. The household responds by compressing routines, less movement, less opening of doors, more careful use of embers, more reliance on dense foods when they are available. This is also when communal behaviour matters more. If one household runs low on fuel, they may borrow. If a neighbour is sick, someone checks in, because illness in this cold can turn quickly. If a roof sags under snow, people help clear it, because everyone understands what collapse means when the ground is frozen and repairs are slow. A village in a brutal winter becomes a web of small obligations, not always cheerful, but often necessary. You do see the strain, though. Tempers shorten. Arguments flare over resources. Someone accuses someone else of taking more than their share of firewood. Someone else mutters about the Lord's rights to woodland, about restrictions, about fines. Winter turns legal arrangements into very physical realities. A rule about who can gather wood becomes the difference between a warm hearth and a cold one. Your body reacts too. Your skin is dry. Your lips crack. Your hands feel rough and tender. You start to understand why people cover their faces with cloth outdoors. Turning into bundles with only eyes visible, you look like a walking laundry pile, and it is not flattering. That is joke number 2, because the medieval winter fashion vibe is mysterious bandit, except the heist target is heat. Then comes the mental weight of monotony. Grey days, short light, long dark. The world shrinks to the cottage, the hearth, the essential chores. Your mind starts hunting for stimulation, and the winter offers very little besides survival tasks. People fill the gap with talk, with small crafts, with mending, with quiet games, with songs sung under breath. Even in peasant life, winter encourages indoor work like spinning and repairs, because you cannot farm snow. Your hands stay busy so your spirit does not freeze. You hear someone mention a winter procession, a church day, a feast that might lift morale. Calendar events matter more now because they break the sameness and give people a sense of forward motion. Time is not measured by clocks, it is measured by how much winter remains. Outside, ice cracks with a sound like distant wood splitting. You realise bodies of water become roads in these conditions, and that can be both useful and dangerous. Crossing frozen rivers might save time, but ice is fickle. You picture someone stepping out, confident, then hearing the wrong kind of crack. Your stomach tightens. In a village, stories like that stick around. You catch yourself thinking, wow, at least you do not have to shovel a driveway. Then you remember that your driveway is the entire landscape, and you still have to move through it, carrying water and fuel and food. That is joke number 3. And it lands like a warm little spark in your mind. The day ends early. The light drains away. People hurry back into shelter. The cold outside feels aggressive now, like it is looking for exposed skin. Inside, the household prepares for another night with the seriousness of a crew preparing a ship for rough sea. They check the door, they check the fire, they pull bedding into the best position. They choose the warmest layers for the most vulnerable. They do not say much about it, because talking does not change it. And in the quiet, you feel something that is both frightening and oddly impressive: human adaptability. When winters become harsh, peasants do not invent radiators. They invent routines. They invent cooperation. They double down on wool, on shelter, on shared heat, on careful fuel use, on food that stores well. They accept discomfort and focus on staying functional. You settle back down and let your body do what it can. The cold remains present, but it has to compete with a household that knows how to endure. Night after night, in a season that refuses to be gentle. The night is so long that it stops feeling like a single stretch. It feels like two nights stitched together with a quiet seam in the middle. You fall asleep. You sink deep for a while. And then, without drama, your eyes open again as if your body has decided the first shift is over. You're not panicked. You're not fully awake either. You're in that calm, hazy middle state where the room is dim, the hearth is mostly ash, and the air feels a little colder than it did when you first closed your eyes. Around you, others stir too. A cough, a blanket adjustment, a soft footstep as someone rises carefully. This is the winter rhythm that surprises modern people, segmented sleep. Many pre-industrial communities appear to have practiced a pattern often described as a first sleep and a second sleep, with a waking period in between. Especially during the long nights of winter, it is not insomnia. It is a schedule shaped by darkness. A mainstream historical fact settles in. Historical references in letters, diaries, and court records from various periods describe people waking in the middle of the night for a while, doing quiet tasks, talking, praying, or simply resting, then going back to sleep. The long winter night gives time for it. The absence of artificial lighting makes it feel natural. You sit up slightly and realise the waking period is not noisy. It is not a party. It is a soft intermission. Someone checks the embers. Someone steps outside briefly, moving fast, returning with cheeks stung red. Someone uses the pot in the corner because, yes, bodily needs do not care about the weather. The smells shift a little as air moves. Then quiet returns. You listen to the kinds of tasks people do in this gap. A woman fingers a spindle and spins a little wool by touch, because spinning does not require bright light and the habit of it is strong. A man mends a strap or checks a tool edge. Someone whispers to someone else, low and intimate, because this is a time when wakefulness feels private even in a shared room. It is dark enough that faces blur, and that blur creates a strange kind of privacy. You realise this waking period has benefits. If you sleep in two stretches, you can adjust your layers between them. You can deal with a draft. You can shift bedding. You can check on a child without fully disrupting the whole night. You can also add a bit of fuel to the hearth if it is needed. Without committing to a full blaze, it is like the household has built a maintenance window into the night. A quirky tidbit slides in with the quiet. Some people use this middle-of-the-night wakefulness for dream interpretation and spiritual reflection, treating it as a liminal time when messages might be clearer. In folk thinking, the boundary between sleeping and waking could be meaningful, and winter's long darkness makes that boundary feel thicker. Even if you are skeptical, you can feel how the mood invites it. The world is quiet, your mind is open, your body is warm enough to think. You lie back down and watch your own thoughts. They drift in a slow, loopy way. You remember random things, like the exact sound of straw when it shifts, or how smoke looks when it catches a tiny bit of a light. Your brain feels like it is reorganizing itself. This waking period is not stressful. It is almost restful in its own way, like a gentle pause where you do not have to do anything dramatic, just exist. Historians still argue how universal segmented sleep was, and how much it varied by region, class, and period, because evidence is scattered, and sometimes comes from later descriptions that may not represent everyone. Some scholars suggest it was common in pre-industrial settings, while others caution against assuming it was the default for all medieval peasants. What you can sense is that long darkness creates opportunities for waking, and communities can turn that into routine. The village outside is silent, but not empty. You can hear faint animal noises. A dog barks once and then stops, as if it remembered the night is not the time for unnecessary announcements. The wind moves through trees. Somewhere, a roof creaks. The cold presses against the walls like a heavy hand. Yet inside, this waking hour feels almost protected, because everyone is used to it. A person whispers a prayer, not urgently, just calmly, like a bedtime habit repeated again. Someone else hums a few notes under their breath, a tune so soft it barely exists. It makes your eyelids heavier again. The night is working in cycles. You think about work and daylight. Winter daylight is short and tasks compete for it. That means any productive time in the night can be useful, especially for indoor crafts like spinning, mending, and small repairs. You can see how the household might use this gap to stay caught up, not because they want to be productive at 2 a.m, but because the season squeezes them. You also see how the waking period allows for quiet social time. In daylight, the household is busy. At night, especially in this middle gap, conversation can happen without interruption. People can talk softly about worries, plans, village news, and small hopes. It is not loud because energy is precious and because others are trying to return to sleep. But it is real. Winter does not just freeze fields. It concentrates lives indoors, making words and relationships feel heavier. Your own body starts to signal that it is ready for the second sleep. The initial alertness fades. Your hands feel warm under cloth. Your feet are numb at the edges, but not painfully so. You find a position that seals drafts and supports your tired muscles. Your breathing slows again. You suddenly think of modern people scrolling through phones when they wake at night, and you picture yourself trying to explain that your night scrolling is actually stare into darkness and think about wool. That is joke number 1, because yes, medieval doom scrolling is just contemplating your own survival strategies. Then you think about the practical side again. This waking period is when someone can check that the door is still secure, that animals are still calm, that no spark has jumped. It is a safety check without needing a designated guard. The household shares responsibility naturally, even if nobody says it. The pattern itself supports survival. You hear a soft snore restart. Another sleeper turns and settles. The cottage gradually sinks back towards silence. You feel the second sleep approaching like a tide. A tiny annoyance pops up as you settle, because your body wants to itch, and you cannot scratch without waking yourself too much. You do a gentle rub against cloth and hope for the best. That is joke number 2, because your skin has decided the night intermission is also the best time to file complaints. You let your thoughts soften. The world outside remains cold and dark, but inside, the household's rhythm is steady. You do not have to force sleep. You simply return to it when your body is ready. Your eyes close again, and the second sleep takes you, slower and deeper. The night is still long, but it is no longer a single burden. It is a pattern you can ride. One quiet, wakeful hour tucked inside it like a small lantern. That is joke number 3. Whispered in your mind as you drift off. Congratulations. You have discovered a medieval feature called built-in night break, and it does not come with an app. Morning arrives with a cruel trick. The light grows, but the cold does not retreat. If anything, it feels sharper, because your body has been still for hours and now has to move again. You sit up and your joints complain like they are ancient. Even if you are not, your fingers feel stiff. Your nose is raw. Your throat is scratchy from smoke and dry air. Winter has been inside you, not just around you. You notice the signs in the household, the quiet inventory of who is fine and who is not. A child with a runny nose, an adult with a rough cough, someone rubbing their hands too much because the skin is cracked and painful. Nobody says, "We are sick," with drama. They just keep going, because stopping is not an option. A mainstream historical fact slides into place. Respiratory illnesses were common in pre-modern societies, and winter conditions like cold, damp, and indoor smoke could aggravate coughing and breathing problems. Medical understanding is different, but the experience is the same. People know what sickness looks like, and they fear it because they have seen how quickly it can turn serious. You watch a woman heat something in a small pot. Not a grand meal, just a preparation. It could be a simple herbal infusion, warm water with honey if the household is lucky, or a thin broth meant to soothe the throat. Warm liquid is medicine here, because it calms, hydrates, and provides comfort. It also feels like warmth you can swallow, which is a powerful idea in winter. Then you see the other remedies, the folk ones, the ones that live in the village memory. An onion cut and placed near someone's head to draw out sickness. Garlic eaten raw despite the sting, because it is believed to strengthen the body. A cloth warmed near the fire and placed over a chest. Animal fat rubbed into cracked skin. Some of these have practical benefits. Some are symbolic, and some are just what you do when you need to do something. A quirky tidbit comes in with a little shiver. Certain winter ailments were sometimes attributed to bad air or malevolent influences, and that could shape treatment. People might burn herbs to cleanse the space, not just for smell, but as a protective act. Smoke is normally a nuisance, but here smoke becomes medicine. Like winter, forcing you to use the same element for opposite purposes. You step outside and the wind slices across your face. Your skin tightens instantly. Your ears ache. You realise frostbite is not a story from polar expeditions. Frostbite is a risk in any severe winter when people must work outdoors. Fingers, toes, noses, ears. All the parts that stick out and do not have much fat. They suffer first. You flex your hands and feel a sting that warns you not to be careless. You see a man wrap cloth around his hands before gripping a tool. You see someone tie extra rags around their feet. You see people keep moving because motion generates heat, but you also see them avoid sweating because sweat becomes cold when you stop. The work is a dance with physics. Inside again, someone examines a child's fingers, checking colour and warmth. This is the quiet vigilance of winter. There is no formal medical system in the modern sense. There are wise women, local healers, midwives, and people with experience. There are also priests who provide spiritual care. But most care is domestic. Mothers, fathers, neighbours, they all become caregivers by necessity. Historians still argue how effective medieval folk medicine was overall, because some remedies are rooted in real plant properties and practical care, while others are based on theories like humours that do not match modern physiology. But the bigger point is that people were not clueless. They observed patterns, shared knowledge, and tried to intervene. Even when the theory is wrong, the attention and warmth can still help. You notice a basic principle in many treatments. Keep the sick person warm and hydrated. That is timeless. You see a child wrapped in extra cloth, placed near the warmest area. You see an adult encouraged to rest when possible. Rest is hard to afford, but it is recognised as valuable. The household redistributes tasks if someone is too ill, because losing a worker to sickness is dangerous. Then you see another fear: contagion. People may not understand germs, but they understand that sickness moves through households. They notice patterns. When one person coughs, others follow. Winter crowds people indoors, and that closeness makes spread more likely. So people may try small separations, like positioning a sick person slightly apart, or using separate cloths, or increasing ventilation briefly. It is not perfect, but it is an attempt. You feel the dryness on your own hands again and watch someone rub fat into their knuckles. It looks greasy. It probably smells a little. It also works as a barrier, reducing cracking and pain. You think of modern hand cream and almost laugh, because this is medieval moisturiser with a very aggressive scent profile. That is joke number 1, and it is true. The day's work continues. Someone must fetch water. Someone must feed animals. Someone must check stored food. Winter illness does not cancel chores. It just makes them harder. You see people take shorter trips outdoors, returning quickly to warmth. You see them cover their mouths with cloth in the wind. You see them warm hands near the hearth and then go back out. The rhythm is relentless. A child sneezes and everyone pretends not to notice. Because if you start noticing every sneeze in winter, you will live in panic. That is joke number 2. Because medieval winter is basically a season-long anxiety test and nobody has the option to opt out. You also notice how communities respond to severe illness. Neighbours bring small help, a bit of food, extra fuel, advice. Charity is not always generous, because resources are limited, but it exists. Church communities might organise aid. Sometimes the Lord's household provides relief in extreme situations, though that can come with obligations and politics. Winter can expose both kindness and hierarchy. You see someone prepare a poultice, perhaps ground herbs mixed with fat or water, applied to a sore or a swollen area. The smell is sharp, the texture is unpleasant, the hope is strong. People cling to remedies because doing nothing feels like surrender, and sometimes doing something, even small, is the difference between despair and endurance. Your own body feels tired. And you realise sleep quality matters here too. If you are sick, sleep becomes even harder. Coughing interrupts rest. Fever makes you sweat, then chills you. The household tries to manage it with extra cloth, warm drinks, and keeping the fire steady. Every resource becomes medical. You step outside again, and the brightness of snow hurts your eyes. You squint, and the world looks harsh and clean and unforgiving. You realise winter is not only cold, it is abrasive. It rubs at skin, at lungs, at patience. It tests the body's boundaries. Then you catch a small moment of humour. Someone complains about the cold with a phrase so familiar it sounds like it has been said for generations. Another person responds with a teasing insult, and for a second, people laugh. The laughter is quick, quiet, and it warms the air in a way the hearth cannot. That is joke number 3, because the best medieval medicine might be a friend roasting you gently while you try not to freeze. As the day fades, you understand that winter sleep and winter illness are tangled. The same conditions that make nights hard also make bodies vulnerable, yet the household adapts with care, with observation, with simple remedies, and with a steady refusal to let sickness turn into hopelessness. Warmth is not only heat, warmth is attention, shared labour, and the small acts that keep a person from being alone in the cold. Winter tightens its grip on the village in a way that feels less like weather and more like economics. You can feel it in the way people look at their woodpile, their grain sack, their stored peas, their small lump of fat, and calculate how many nights those things can become warmth. The cold is not only outside, it is inside the decisions. You walk through the village and notice small signals of strain. A door that stays closed longer than usual, a chimney or roof hole that sends up thinner smoke, meaning less fuel is being burned. A person lingering near a neighbour's threshold a little too long, waiting for an excuse to ask for help without having to say the words. Winter creates a new social language, one made of glances, pauses, and cautious pride. A mainstream historical fact settles in. Medieval village life often relied on common resources and mutual obligations, including access to commons for grazing and sometimes for gathering fuel, as well as neighbourly reciprocity and church-based charity. When winter is harsh, those systems are tested. Help can come from neighbours, from kin, from the parish, or from the Lord's estate, but it is never guaranteed, and it often has conditions. You see a woman carrying a bundle of sticks that look too small to matter. She carries them like treasure. It is deadwood, gathered where she is allowed to gather it. Perhaps in a hedgerow or along a lane. Each stick is a few more minutes of flame, a few more minutes of cooking, a few more minutes of warmth soaking into cloth. The bundle is light, but the meaning is heavy. You watch another household barter, a bit of cheese for a bit of firewood, a small service for a loan of grain. Winter turns favours into currency. People remember who helped and who did not. They also remember who took advantage. The village is close enough that reputations stick like mud. A quirky tidbit slips into view. Some villages practiced informal winter watching of each other's chimneys and smoke, not as a strict surveillance, but as a quiet check on who might be struggling. A thin smoke plume could signal scarcity. A house with no smoke might signal illness, absence, or serious trouble. People could interpret these signs and decide when to intervene. It is community care with a side of gossip, which is honestly a very human combination. You feel the tension around asking for help. Pride matters. No one wants to admit they cannot manage. Yet winter can push even careful households into need. A poor harvest, an extra mouth to feed, an illness, a lost animal, a broken tool. Suddenly you're short on fuel or food, and the nights become longer in a way that has nothing to do with darkness. You see the church play its role, not necessarily as a warm building you sleep in, but as a centre of moral expectation. People are taught that charity matters. Alms might be distributed, a wealthy household might donate, a priest might encourage aid, but charity is uneven, and it depends on local wealth and local priorities. Sometimes help comes, sometimes it does not. Sometimes the help is small, more symbolic than practical. You also see the Lord's shadow. In some places, a manor might provide relief or allow access to fuel in harsh conditions. In other places, rights are enforced strictly, and taking wood without permission can lead to punishment. Winter makes the legal structure of medieval society feel sharp. What looks like property rights becomes a question of whether you can keep your children warm. That is a brutal kind of politics, lived at the scale of a single hearth. Historians still argue how common effective famine relief and charity were at the village level, because records can highlight exceptional gifts or exceptional conflicts. While everyday informal support is harder to document, some communities appear resilient and cooperative, others appear fractured, especially under repeated stress. The truth likely changes from place to place and year to year. You walk past a house where an older person sits near the doorway, wrapped in cloth, watching the lane. Their eyes are tired but alert. They are not asking directly for anything, but their presence is a signal. In a village, signals are a language. Someone will read it. A neighbour stops and speaks quietly. A small exchange happens. Maybe a handful of dried peas, maybe a strip of cloth, maybe a promise. The neighbour leaves, and the older person's shoulders relax slightly. The gift is not huge, but it is enough to change the night's math. You feel a tightness in your chest ease, because you realise winter survival is often made of small margins. A little more fuel, a little more food, a little more cloth, a little more help. Then you see the hard edge. Another household refuses a request, not out of cruelty, but out of fear. They cannot spare anything. They are close to the edge too. The refusal is quiet, embarrassed, and defensive. The person asking nods and leaves with their hands empty. No shouting, no drama. Just the cold reality that generosity is constrained by scarcity. You think of modern advice like build an emergency fund, and you almost laugh because the medieval emergency fund is literally a pile of wood and a bag of grain. And if either one runs out, your bedtime routine becomes a crisis. That is joke number one, and it is darkly accurate. Winter also forces hard choices about labour. If fuel is scarce, people may spend more daylight hours gathering it, which leaves less time for other tasks. If someone is ill, others must cover their work, which increases exhaustion. Exhaustion makes nights harder. Nights harder makes days harder. The village runs on human energy, and winter drains that energy steadily. You notice how families prioritised. Children get the warmest spot. The sick get extra cloth. The elderly get closer to the hearth when possible. These choices are not always fair, but they are shaped by care and by necessity. Sometimes a strong adult chooses discomfort so someone else can sleep a little warmer. That sacrifice is rarely announced. It is simply done. A quirky detail catches your eye. People sometimes set up small windbreaks inside the room using hanging cloth or stacked items, creating little sheltered corners for sleeping. It is like interior architecture made from whatever you own. A bench becomes a barrier, a chest becomes a wall, a curtain becomes a draft stopper. Winter turns furniture into insulation. You imagine rearranging your living room to survive, and you realise you would do it too if the alternative was freezing. That is joke number two, because your interior design style has become functional desperation, and it is trending hard. You hear a distant argument outside, two voices sharp with stress, probably about wood or debt or a borrowed item not returned. The argument fades, the village absorbs it. People do not have the energy for endless conflict, but winter pushes tempers anyway. Then, almost immediately, you see someone else offer help to a different neighbour, proving that the village can be both harsh and kind in the same hour. As darkness falls, households prepare again, doors are checked, animals are settled, bedding is arranged, fuel is measured with the eyes. People speak softly. The night feels like a test you take every day. You stand near the hearth and watch someone break a stick into smaller pieces to make it last. The snap is loud. The stick breaks cleanly. The person places the pieces with care. This is not waste. It is planning. A small fire that lasts is better than a big fire that dies early. The household is managing time in terms of embers, and historians still argue about the balance between individual household self-reliance and broader village-level cooperation, because medieval society contains both strong communal structures and strong hierarchies. Some villages function like tight-knit networks. Some function like collections of struggling units. Stress reveals which one you're living in. You settle into the sleeping area and feel the weight of decisions in the air, not spoken but present. Who has enough? Who does not? Who will make it through this week without borrowing? Who will need help? Winter makes those questions unavoidable. You close your eyes and let your body sink into warmth where it can find it. Outside, the cold presses in. Inside, what stands against it is not only cloth and fire, it is the village itself, imperfect, anxious, sometimes generous, sometimes brittle, but still a web that can catch you when winter tries to pull you under. That is joke number 3, whispered in your mind. Medieval community support is like a blanket with holes, still better than nothing, and you learn to appreciate it very quickly. The first sign is not warmth, it is sound. Somewhere outside the cottage, water begins to move again. It is faint at first, a soft trickle that feels like a secret. Then it becomes more confident, a small stream of meltwater threading through ruts and hollows. The air is still cold, but it changes. It smells less metallic. It smells like damp earth waking up. You step outside and see the village in a new mood. Snow is still present, but it looks tired. The surface is pitted, grey in places, shrinking back from fences and walls. The sun is still weak, but it lingers a little longer, and that extra light feels like someone added minutes to your life. People notice too. Shoulders sit lower, voices come back. The world is not easy yet, but it has shifted. A mainstream historical fact fits naturally here. Medieval rural life is deeply seasonal, and the transition from winter into spring brings changes in labour, diet and daily rhythm. As daylight grows, tasks expand, fields are inspected, tools are prepared, animals begin to move more, people plan planting. Even if cold snaps still happen, the direction of time becomes forward. You feel the relief first in your body. Your fingers move with less pain. Your skin still cracks, but it heals faster. You can stand near the doorway without feeling like the draft is trying to assassinate you. The nights remain chilly, but they are less endless. That matters psychologically. When winter dominates, it feels like it will never stop. When thaw begins, hope becomes practical again. You notice changes in the household. Bedding is aired more often, straw is turned, damp cloth is hung where it can dry, doors open a little longer to clear smoky air, and it does not immediately punish everyone with a stabbing cold. The cottage breathes. It feels less like a sealed survival box and more like a home. A quirky tidbit arrives in the form of a small village habit. When the thaw starts, some people pay extra attention to thresholds and doorways, cleaning them, sweeping away winter's build-up, sometimes adding small protective gestures like fresh greenery or simple markings. Part of it is practical, keeping mud from taking over. Part of it is symbolic, resetting the household's boundary as the season changes. Winter leaves a residue in the mind, and people like to wipe it away. You walk through the village and see the work shifting. Men and women repair fences damaged by snow and wind. They check roofs. They patch walls where frost has opened gaps. They count remaining fuel and decide how carefully to use it until wood gathering becomes easier. They inspect stored food, feeling the weight of sacks, testing if anything has spoiled. Winter does not end with a clean snap. It fades, and the fading still requires management. You also notice the hunger season lurking. Even as winter loosens, stores can be low. The period before new crops arrive can be difficult. People talk about it without naming it directly. They stretch food. They rely on what remains. They look forward to fresh greens, even simple ones, because fresh greens mean vitamins and variety, but also because they mean the land is giving again. Historians still argue about how peasants experience the transition season emotionally, because direct personal testimony is rare. Some evidence suggests relief and celebration tied to religious festivals and spring rituals. Other evidence points to continued hardship until harvest. Both can be true. Spring is hope, but hope does not immediately fill a grain bin. You watch children play a little more outside, their energy returning like sap rising. They throw bits of ice, chase each other around puddles, and squeal when a boot sinks into mud. The adults scold them half-heartedly, because scolding requires energy, and the adults are secretly glad to hear laughter again. Mud is annoying, but mud is also proof that the ground is not frozen solid anymore. Mud is the world thawing. You step near a puddle and see your reflection wobble. You look a bit worn, your cheeks are chapped, your eyes look tired. Then you notice something else. You look alive. That is not a given in harsh seasons. You feel a quiet pride, not heroic, but steady. The pride of having endured. You did not conquer winter, you outlasted it. Someone in the village starts talking about planting plans. Which field first? Which seed? Who will share a plough team? Who will lend a beast? The conversation is practical, but it carries optimism. Planning is a form of confidence. It says, we expect to be here long enough to need to worry about next month. You think about sleep now, how it changes as nights shorten. People do not have to spend as many hours in darkness. The segmented rhythm softens, because there is less time for it. People wake with more light. They can start work earlier without waiting for dawn to fully arrive. Sleep becomes less like a survival tactic and more like a recovery tool again. You also notice the fire's role changing. It is still important, but the pressure eases. A small fire can warm the room adequately on many nights. Fuel becomes a little less terrifying to spend. Smoke becomes less constant because doors can open more. The air inside feels less heavy, your throat thanks you. Then you catch a moment of comedy in the village. A man steps into a muddy patch and loses a shoe, and he has to stand there, 1 foot sock-wrapped, trying to rescue it without falling. People laugh. He laughs too, because it is spring and the joke is not deadly. That is joke number 1, and it is the kind of laughter that feels like a thaw inside the chest. You see animals looking livelier. Chickens peck at newly exposed ground. A cow shakes its head and flicks its tail, as if celebrating the return of tolerable weather. Even the dog looks less offended by existence. The whole village seems to move with slightly more speed. You realize winter has left lessons behind. People remember which patches in the wall leaked the most cold. They remember which blankets were too thin. They remember who helped and who refused. Those memories will shape preparations for the next cold season. Repairs will be made. Fuel stores will be built. Extra straw will be saved. Wool will be patched. Winter makes planners out of survivors. And yes, even you begin to plan, because winter has rewritten your standards. Warmth is no longer assumed. It is valued. A dry blanket is no longer boring. It is beautiful. A windproof door is not just carpentry. It is kindness. That's joke number 2, because you have become the kind of person who would look at a well-fitted window and feel emotional, and you would not even be embarrassed. As evening comes, the air cools again, but the cold feels different. It feels temporary. The cottage prepares for sleep with habits that have become smooth, and the night settles without the same heavy threat. You lie down and feel the straw beneath you, the wool around you, the shared warmth nearby. It still matters, but it is less desperate. You close your eyes and let the sound of drip, drip, drip from melting snow carry you toward rest. Each drip is a small promise. The season is turning. The world is moving again. That is joke number 3, whispered in your mind. Winter finally logged off, and spring just signed in, and nobody misses the old password. Now the story slows, and you let the cottage fade into a softer image. You can hear the wind, but it is gentler. You can smell smoke, but it does not sting. You can feel wool against your skin, steady and familiar, holding warmth the way a hand holds yours, quietly, without needing to prove anything. You breathe in. You breathe out. The village outside becomes a calm blur of roofs and fences and thawing ground. The cold is still present in the corners of the night, but it is no longer the ruler. It is just a guest that is slowly leaving. Your body loosens. Your jaw unclenches. Your shoulders drop. You do not need to monitor every draft. You do not need to count embers with your mind. You let yourself rest, the way people rest when they believe tomorrow is possible, and the day after that too. The last image is simple. A small candle of dawn on the horizon, not bright, just steady. The cottagers sit quietly. A thin ribbon of smoke rises. Somewhere, Water moves under ice and refuses to stop. You let that steady movement lull you, like a lullaby made of spring's first sounds. End of script. Sweet dreams?